In a quiet valley nestled between low, rolling hills and winds that whispered like old storytellers, there lived a human child named Alin. The valley itself seemed untouched by urgency. Time moved differently there, slow, deliberate, almost thoughtful. Mornings arrived on golden feet, and evenings lingered long after the sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky with fading embers. The people of the valley lived simple lives. They farmed, tended animals, and told stories around fires that crackled beneath star-heavy skies. They believed in seasons, in hard work, and in things they could touch and see. They trusted the soil, the rain, and the cycle of life they understood. But Alin believed in other things. The villagers often called the child strange. Not loudly, not cruelly, but in hushed tones carried between glances and gentle sighs. It was not that Alin caused trouble, quite the opposite. Alin was quiet, kind, and never disobedient, yet there was something different in the way the child looked at the world, as if it held secrets others had forgotten how to see. While other children raced through fields chasing goats or climbed trees with scraped knees and laughter, Alin wandered alone. Not lonely, never lonely, but alone in a way that seemed intentional. Alin spoke to the wind, to the flowers, to insects crawling through the grass. Sometimes villagers would catch fragments of these quiet conversations. "Do you like the sun today?" Alin would ask a patch of wildflowers. "Are you tired of standing?" Alin would whisper to an old fence post. No one ever answered. And yet Alin always listened as if they might. Some villagers found it endearing, others found it unsettling. A few simply shook their heads and muttered, "The child will grow out of it." But Alin never did. One late afternoon, when the sun hung low and the valley glowed in soft amber light, Alin wandered farther than usual. The air was dry that day, carrying the faint scent of dust and old water. Beyond the village, past the grazing fields and the thin line of trees, lay a dried riverbed, a scar in the land that once carried life. The elders spoke of it sometimes. Long ago, they said, water had rushed through that channel wide and deep. Fish had swum there, children had played there. But the river had vanished before most could remember, leaving behind only smooth stones and cracked earth. Alin had never seen it when it was alive. Still, the child liked to visit. There was something peaceful about the place. The silence there felt different, not empty but waiting, as if the river had not truly left but merely paused. Alin stepped carefully down into the riverbed, bare feet pressing against cool stone. Small rocks shifted beneath each step, clicking softly. The wind moved lazily through the hollow, carrying a low hum that almost sounded like distant voices. Alin crouched, running fingers through the stones. Each one was different, some rough, some smooth, some pale, others dark. They were all that remained of something once powerful. "What did you use to carry?" Alin asked quietly. The question hung in the air, unanswered. "As always." And yet Alin smiled. It was then that Alin saw it. Among the countless stones scattered across the dry riverbed, one caught the child's attention. It was not larger than the others, nor brighter. In fact, it seemed almost unremarkable at first glance, a dark, rounded stone with a smooth surface nestled half-buried in dust. But something about it felt different. Alin tilted their head, eyes narrowing slightly. The child stepped closer. The stone did not shine, it did not glow, it did not call out. And yet Alin felt drawn to it. Slowly, carefully, Alin knelt and brushed away the dust surrounding it. Fingers traced its surface, following its curves. It was smooth, smoother than the others nearby, almost polished. And warm. Alin froze. The air around them was cool. The ground beneath was chilled by shadow. Every other stone felt cold to the touch. But this one held warmth. Not the fatting warmth of sunlight, not the surface heat of a rock baked during the day. This warmth was deeper, steady, quiet. Alive. Alin's breath caught softly. The child lifted the stone gently, holding it in both hands. It was heavier than expected, solid and balanced. The warmth seeped into Alin's palms, spreading up their fingers like a slow heartbeat. For a long moment, Alin simply stared at it. Then softly, almost with certainty rather than wonder, Alin spoke. "It hasn't grown yet." The words were not a question. They were an understanding. The journey back to the village was careful and deliberate. Alin held the stone close as though it were something fragile. Though it looked no different from any other rock, the child's movement suggested something precious, something worth protecting. A few villagers noticed. "What have you got there?" one woman asked as Alin passed. Alin paused, looking down at the stone before answering. "A seed," the child said simply. The woman blinked, then laughed lightly. "A seed that looks like a rock." Alin did not argue. Instead, the child smiled softly, patiently, and continued walking. Behind Alin's home was a small patch of land. It was not large nor particularly fertile. A few herbs grew there, along with stubborn grass that refused to die no matter how often it was pulled. It was here that Alin chose to plant the stone. The child knelt, carefully digging a shallow hole in the earth. The soil was dry but soft enough to move. Alin placed the stone inside, then covered it gently, patting the soil down as one might tuck in a blanket. For a moment, Alin simply knelt there, hands resting on the ground. "Don't worry," the child whispered, "you'll grow." There was no response. Only silence. But Alin nodded as if reassured. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Alin woke. The village was quiet, wrapped in the pale blue of early dawn. Most people still slept, their homes silent and still. Alin slipped outside, carrying a small clay cup filled with water from the well. The air was cool, brushing softly against the child's skin. Birds had not yet begun their songs. Even the wind seemed to wait. Alin knelt beside the patch of soil. Carefully, slowly, the child poured the water over the spot where the stone lay buried. The earth darkened as it absorbed the moisture, drinking it in. "There," Alin said softly, "that should help." The child stayed there a moment longer, watching, as if expecting something to happen immediately. Nothing did. Still, Alin smiled. Days passed, then weeks. And every single morning, without fail, Alin brought water. Sometimes it was just a cup, sometimes two. On hotter days when the sun beat down and the soil cracked, Alin brought more. The child watched the sky, learning when rain might come, worrying when it did not. Other children noticed. At first, they ignored it, but curiosity has a way of turning into amusement and amusement into mockery. One afternoon, a group of children gathered near Alin's home, watching as the child knelt beside the patch of soil, pouring water with careful precision. "What are you doing?" one of them called out. Alin glanced up briefly, "Watering it." "Watering what?" another asked, snickering. "My seed." The children exchanged glances. "That's just a rock," one said. Alin shook their head gently, "It just hasn't grown yet." Laughter broke out. "You can't grow rocks," one boy said, stepping closer. "You're wasting water." Alin did not respond. Instead, the child finished pouring the water, placing the empty cup aside. "It needs time," Alin said quietly. The children laughed again, louder this time, before eventually losing interest and running off toward more exciting games. Alin remained, watching, waiting. Time moved as it always did in the valley, steady, patient, indifferent. The sun rose and fell. The winds shifted. Clouds gathered and scattered. And still Alin watered the stone. There were nights when the wind howled through the valley, rattling doors and bending trees. On those nights, Alin would slip outside, checking the patch of soil, ensuring it had not been disturbed. There," the child would whisper, smoothing the dirt. "You're safe." There were days when rain poured endlessly, soaking the earth until it turned to mud. On those days, Alin would sit nearby, frowning slightly. "That might be too much," the child would murmur. But still, Alin stayed. Always nearby. Always watching. The villagers watched too. At first, it was dismissed as childish imagination. Then, as weeks turned into months, it became something else. Concern. Alin's parents spoke quietly at night. "It isn't normal," one said. "It's harmless," the other replied. "But what if? What if nothing? The child will grow out of it." But even as they spoke, uncertainty lingered. Because Alin did not grow out of it. If anything, the child grew more certain. More patient. More devoted. And beneath the soil, unseen and unknown, something stirred. Deep within the stone, no, not a stone, though it wore that shape, something ancient slept. Time had wrapped around it like layers of dust. Years had hardened its shell, hiding it from the world. It had been forgotten. Abandoned. Waiting. But even in sleep, it was not entirely unaware. There were sensations. Faint. Distant. A warmth above. A rhythm. Something new. Something persistent. Each drop of water that seeped into the earth carried with it more than moisture. It carried intention, care, belief. Things the ancient being within had not felt in a very long time. Perhaps ever. And so deep in the darkness, something shifted. Not enough to wake. Not yet, but enough to dream. Above, Elin knelt once more, pouring water into the soil. The child placed a hand gently against the ground, eyes soft. You're going to grow, Elin whispered. I know it. The earth remained still. The stone remained hidden. The world remained unawares. But far below the surface, in the quiet depths where time moved differently, something listened. And for the first time in centuries, it began to respond. Seasons, like patient storytellers, turned their pages without asking permission. The valley changed in quiet, inevitable ways. The green of early spring deepened into the full breath of summer, then softened into the gold and amber of autumn. The winds grew colder, sharper, carrying with them the scent of frost and distant mountains. Leaves fell, gathered, and disappeared. The sky itself seemed to change its mood, sometimes vast and open, sometimes heavy with gray silence. But in one small patch of earth behind a modest home, nothing seemed to change at all. Elin still knelt there every morning. Still carried water. Still whispered softly to something no one else believed in. At first, the villagers had smiled at it, shaking their heads with gentle amusement. It was, after all, a harmless thing, a child playing at growing life from stone. But as the days stretched into weeks and the weeks into months, that gentle amusement began to fade. In its place came unease. Because Elin did not stop. Not when the sun grew harsh and the soil cracked beneath its heat. Not when the rains came and soaked the ground until it became heavy and unyielding. Not even when winter arrived, painting the mornings with frost and turning breath into visible clouds in the air. Every day without fail, Elin continued. At first, Elin's family tried to ignore it. It is only a phase, Elin's mother would say, her voice calm but uncertain. Children imagine things, they create meaning where there is none. Elin's father would nod, though his gaze often lingered on the small patch of soil longer than he intended. But time did not prove them right. If anything, it made the situation harder to dismiss. Elin's routine did not waver. If the well froze, the child broke the thin layer of ice with careful hands to gather water. If the winds were too strong, Elin shielded the small patch with their own body, crouching low as the air howled around them. There was no frustration in the child's actions. No impatience. Only quiet certainty. And that certainty began to unsettle those who watched. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills and shadows stretched long across the village, Elin's family gathered inside their home. The air was warm, filled with the faint scent of cooked grain and herbs. Elin sat near the doorway, glancing outside every so often. The patch of soil was visible from where the child sat. Always visible. Elin, the father said gently, setting aside his cup. Come sit properly, you've been out there all day. I'm watching, Elin replied. Watching what? Elin hesitated, as if the answer were too obvious to need explanation. It might grow when I'm not looking, the child said finally, but I don't want to miss it. The room fell silent. The father exchanged a glance with the mother, one filled with concern. Neither of them spoke aloud. It will not grow, the father said carefully. It is a stone, stones do not grow. Elin looked at him not with defiance, but with a kind of quiet confusion. How do you know? The child asked. The father opened his mouth to answer, but found that he could not. Because the truth was simple. He knew because he had always known. Because that was how the world worked. Because stones were stones. But when he looked at Elin, really looked, he saw something that made those simple answers feel insufficient. I just do, he said finally, though the words felt weak even to him. Elin nodded slowly. But the child did not agree. The matter might have remained within the family, quietly carried as a private worry, if not for the attention of the village elders. They were the keepers of tradition, of knowledge, of what was considered true and unchanging. They had seen many seasons, many children, many odd behaviors that came and went like passing weather. But Elin's persistence did not pass. It deepened. And so one morning, as the village gathered near the well, one of the elders approached Elin. He was a tall man, his hair long turned silver, his face lined with years of experience and certainty. He watched Elin for a moment as the child poured water onto the same patch of soil. Then he spoke. Enough of this. His voice was not harsh, but it carried weight. Elin looked up. The elder stepped closer, his gaze steady. You cannot grow life from stone, he said. You waste water, time, and thought on something that will never change. Around them, the villagers grew quiet, conversations faded, eyes turned. Alin remained still. For a moment, it seemed as though the child might argue, might defend what had become so important. But instead, Alin simply placed a small hand gently against the soil. "It just needs more time," the child said softly. The elder frowned. "Time will not change what it is," he replied. "A stone is a stone." Alin's fingers pressed lightly into the earth. "It isn't," the child said. There was no anger in the words. No challenge. Just belief. The elder shook his head, stepping back. "Then you will learn," he said quietly. "In time you will see." And with that, he turned away. The villagers slowly returned to their conversations, but something had shifted. Where once there had been mild amusement, there was now something heavier. Doubt, concern, and for some, the faintest trace of unease. But Alin did not change. Not that day. Not the next. Not ever. Beneath the surface, hidden from all eyes, something else was beginning to change. At first, it was almost imperceptible. A faint pulse. So slow, so distant, that it could not be heard or felt by any human sense. But it was there. A rhythm. A heartbeat. The shell, once cold, once lifeless, held within it something ancient, something vast, something that had endured time itself. For centuries, it had lain untouched. Forgotten. The world had moved on without it. Skis that had once burned with wings of fire had grown empty. The great shadows that once crossed mountains and seas had vanished into myth and story. The last of its kind had fallen silent. And this one had never been born. Time had hardened its shell, cloaking it in the perfect disguise. It became a stone, indistinguishable from the countless others scattered across the land. Creatures had passed it by. Storms had buried it. Seasons had worn it smooth. No one had seen it. No one had cared. Until a human child knelt above it and decided that it was something more. The first drop of water had been nothing. A sensation so faint it barely registered. The second had been the same. But the drops kept coming. Day after day. Week after week. Each one carried more than moisture. It carried presence, intention, something the ancient being within had not known. Not in this long, endless sleep. At first, the responses were instinctive. Subtle, a slight retention of warmth. A slowing of the endless drift into deeper dormancy. Then gradually something changed. The warmth lingered. The rhythm formed. And the dream began. Within the darkness of the shell there was no sight. No sound. No shape. Only memories. Fragments of something older than the valley, older than the hills, older even than the dried riverbed that lay above. There were skis vast and endless. There was fire bright and consuming. There were voices deep, resonant, powerful. And then, silence. A long, unbroken silence. Until now, the child's presence did not exist in words. It was not something the being within could understand in any logical sense. But it felt it. A steady, unwavering attention. A warmth that did not fade with time. A belief that did not require proof. Each drop of water was a message without language. You matter. You will grow. You are not forgotten. And so something deep within the shell responded. Not consciously. Not yet. But inevitably. The pulse grew stronger. Still faint. Still slow. But no longer insignificant. It moved through the shell, a gentle echo that would have gone unnoticed by any who were not looking for it. And no one was. No one except the child who already believed. Alin began to notice small things. At first, it was nothing more than a feeling. When the child placed a hand on the soil, there was warmth, subtle but unmistakable. It was not the warmth of sunlight. Not the warmth of the air. It was deeper. Alive. Alin smiled. I knew it, the child whispered. Winter came. The valley grew cold. Frost covered the ground each morning, turning grass brittle and white. The well froze more often than not, forcing villagers to break the ice before drawing water. The winds grew sharp, biting through clothing and skin alike. Most people stayed indoors as much as they could. But not Alin's. Each morning the child wrapped in layers and stepped out into the cold, carrying water with careful hands. The ground was hard, the soil stiff, but Alin knelt anyway. Slowly, gently, the child poured water onto the same patch of earth, watching as it sank into the frozen ground. "It's colder now," Alin murmured, "but that's all right, I'm still here." The words drifted into the air, carried away by the wind. But not lost. Not entirely. Beneath the surface, the warmth held. The pulse continued. And something else began. A shift. A stretching. A subtle pressure against the shell. Not enough to break it. Not yet. But enough to change it. Time moved forward. As it always did. As it always would. Then one evening, something happened. The sun was low, casting the valley in shades of gold and amber. The air was still, as if the world itself were pausing between breaths. Alin knelt beside the patch of soil as always. The child had just poured water, the last light of day catching in the droplets as they soaked into the earth. For a moment, everything was quiet. Still, then, a sound. Soft, sharp, almost too faint to notice. But Alin noticed. The child froze. Slowly, carefully, Alin leaned closer. The ground beneath their hand felt different. Not just warm. Tense. Alive. Then it came again. A crack. This time clearer. More certain. Alin's breath caught. The soil shifted just slightly. And beneath it something moved. The stone trembled. A thin line spread across its surface, unseen beneath the earth. A fracture. Delicate. Precise. And impossibly significant. Another crack followed. Soft. Almost shy. As if whatever lay within was testing the world beyond its shell. Alin's eyes widened. But there was no fear. No hesitation. Only wonders. And a quiet, blooming joy. "You're growing," the child whispered. The words trembled with emotion, soft and reverent. As if speaking too loudly might break the moment. Beneath the shell something shifted. For the first time in centuries, the ancient being within did not merely dream. It stirred. Not fully awake. Not yet. But closer than ever before. And somewhere deep within that ancient, forming consciousness, something answered. Not in words. Not in sound. But in movement. In life. In the slow, inevitable breaking of silence. The night the egg broke, the world did not announce it. There was no thunder rolling across the hills, no sudden storm rising from a clear sky, no voice carried on the wind to warn of what was about to change. The valley lay as it always had, quiet, settled, wrapped in the familiar rhythm of its people and their lives. And yet something was different. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. A stillness, as though the land itself were holding its breath. The sun had long since disappeared behind the hills, leaving behind a fatting trail of crimson and gold that slowly dissolved into the deep blue of night. One by one, the lights in the village dimmed as people retreated into their homes, seeking warmth and rest. The winds, which so often whispered through the valley, had quieted. Even the insects seemed to pause. Above, the sky stretched wide and endless, scattered with stars that shimmered like distant embers. The moon hung low, casting pale silver light across the fields, the rooftops, and the small patch of soil behind a modest home. And there, sitting quietly in the cool night air, was Alin. The child had not gone inside. Had not even tried. Sleep felt impossible, not out of fear, but because something inside them knew that this night mattered. For days now, the changes had grown more obvious. The cracks beneath the soil had widened. The warmth had intensified. And earlier that evening, as Alin had pressed a hand against the earth, they had felt it, clear and unmistakable. Movement. Not imagined. Not hoped for. Real. Something was coming. And Alin was not going to miss it. The child sat cross-legged beside the small patch of earth, a thin blanket wrapped loosely around their shoulders. A clay cup of water rested nearby, though it had long since gone untouched. There was no need for it now. Whatever lay beneath the soil no longer needed encouragement. It was already awake. Alin's eyes remained fixed on the ground, unblinking, patient. Waiting. At first, nothing happened. The minutes stretched into hours. The night deepened. The temperature dropped, and a thin layer of frost began to form on the edges of grass and stone. Still, Alin did not move. Did not leave. Did not doubt. Because the child had learned something the rest of the village had not. Growth did not always happen where it could be seen. Then, slowly, it began. A faint glow seeped through the soil. It was soft at first, so faint it could have been mistaken for moonlight catching on damp earth. But it did not fade. It did not shift with the movement of clouds. It pulsed, gently, rhythmically, like a heartbeat. Alin leaned forward, breath catching. The glow grew stronger, thin lines of light tracing unseen cracks beneath the surface. The earth itself seemed to shimmer, as though something beneath it was reaching outward. The warmth followed. It rose from the ground in waves, pushing back the chill of the night. Frost melted in small, glistening patches. The air above the soil wavered slightly, like heat rising from sun-warmed stone. Alin reached out, placing a hand flat against the earth. It was no longer just warm. It was hot. Alive. A sound broke the silence. Sharp, clear, unmistakable. A crack. Alin froze. The sound had come from below, from within the buried stone. The child's heart began to race not with fear, but with anticipation so strong it almost hurt. Another crack followed. This one louder. Closer. The ground trembled. Not violently, not enough to disturb the surrounding soil, but enough that Alin felt it, a subtle vibration that traveled up through their hand and into their chest. "It's time," Alin whispered. The words were not a question. They were a promise fulfilled. The soil shifted. At first, it was only a slight movement, a small ripple, as if something beneath was pushing gently against its boundaries. Then slowly the earth began to rise. A small mound formed, the dirt cracking and breaking apart as something forced its way upward. Alin scrambled back just enough to give it space, but not far enough to lose sight of it. The ground split, and from within the stone emerged. It no longer looked like a stone. The surface was fractured, jagged lines spreading across it like veins of molten light. Each crack glowed from within, a soft golden radiance that pulsed with growing intensity. The shell, because it was no longer possible to think of it as anything else, shuddered. Another crack, louder this time. A piece of the outer layer broke away, falling to the ground with a dull thud. Light spilled out from the opening. Warm, brilliant, alive. Alin's breath hitched. The glow illuminated the child's face, reflecting in wide, unblinking eyes. Then, with a sharp ringing sound that seemed to echo far beyond the small garden, the shell split open. For a moment, everything was light. Not blinding, not overwhelming, but pure, radiant, as though something ancient had been waiting for this single instant to release all that it was. The broken pieces of the shell fell away, scattering across the ground. And from within, something moved. It was small, far smaller than the legends whispered in half-forgotten stories. No larger than a newborn goat, its body curled tightly as it struggled against the remnants of its shell. Its scales caught the light, shimmering with hues that shifted between deep crimson and soft gold. Tiny wings, still folded and fragile, clung to its sides. Its limbs trembled as it pushed itself forward, unsteady, unfamiliar with the weight of existence. Its head lifted slowly. Two small horns curved gently backward, framing a face that was both strange and beautiful. And then, its eyes opened. They reflected the stars, but not as mere points of light. There was depth in them. Light, something vast and ancient, compressed into a being that had only just taken its first breath. A dragon. The word did not exist in Alin's mind in that moment. There was no label, no understanding of history or legend. Only recognitions, not of what it was, but of what it meant. The creature inhaled sharply. Its chest rose, small but powerful. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, as it exhaled, a faint curl of smoke slipped from its nostrils, drifting upward into the cold night air. It wavered there for a moment before fatting. A breath. Its first. Alin did not move away, did not flinch, did not run. Where others might have felt fear, might have seen danger, something unknown and potentially destructive, Alin saw only what had always been there. Something growing, something alive, something that had needed care. The child leaned forward, slow and deliberate, as though approaching a frightened animal. "Hello," Alin said softly. The dragon blinked. Its gaze shifted, unfocused at first, then settling, locking onto the child. For a moment, the world seemed to narrow. There was no village, no valley, no sky, only two beings looking at one another for the first time. Within the dragon, something stirred. Instinct. Ancient, powerful, deeply ingrained. It spoke of dominance, of territory, of fire and flight and skis claimed by strength alone. But layered over that, woven through it like threads of something new, was another sensation. Familiar, warm, recognized. The presence it had felt. The steady rhythm above its shell. The one who had stayed. The one who had believed. Connection. The dragon tilted its head, studying the child. Then softly, uncertainly, it made a sound. A small chirp. Not the roar of legend. Not the thunder of ancient power. But something quieter. Curious. Alin smiled. Slowly, carefully, the dragon moved. Its limbs trembled with the effort, untested and weak but determined. It crawled forward one small step at a time, closing the distance between them. Alin remained still, hand resting lightly on the ground. Waiting. The dragon reached the child. It hesitated just for a moment, as if unsure. Then, gently, it lowered its head and rested it against Alin's hand. Warm, alive, real. Alin let out a breath they had not realized they were holding. Their fingers moved instinctively, brushing lightly against the creature's scales. "They told me you wouldn't grow," the child whispered. The dragon's eyes closed halfway, a soft rumble rising from its chest. Content. Far beyond the valley, something shifted. In distant mountains, where jagged peaks cut into the sky and clouds clung to stone, something stirred in the darkness of a long-forgotten cave. Deep beneath the earth, where ancient tunnels wound through layers of rock untouched by light, something shifted in its sleep. Across the world, in places where time had buried memory beneath silence, echoes awakened. Not fully, not yet, but enough. The last dragon had not died. It had waited. Back in the valley, the night continued. But it was no longer the same. The stillness had changed. It was no longer empty. It was a listening. Alin remained beside the dragon, the two of them illuminated by the soft glow that still lingered from the broken shell. Time passed. Neither moved away. And slowly, inevitably, dawn began to rise. The first light of morning crept over the hills, pale and gentle. It stretched across the valley, touching rooftops, fields, and finally the small garden behind Alin's home. The glow of the broken shell faded in the presence of sunlight. But what remained did not need it. The dragon shifted, lifting its head. Its wings twitched, catching the light. Its eyes, now fully open, reflected not just the sky, but the world it had entered. And the world, in turn, began to notice. The first villager to see them froze. A woman, carrying water from the well, stopped mid-step as her gaze fell upon the small figure in the garden. The child, and beside them, the creature. The cup slipped from her hands, shattering against the ground. Others turned. Voices rose. Footsteps hurried. Within minutes, the quiet of morning was replaced by a growing crowd, villagers gathering at a distance, their eyes wide, their expressions caught between disbelief and fear. They had no word for what they were seeing. Only fragments of old stories. Of fire, of wings, of destruction. But this was small, quiet, resting beside a child. Fear flickered in their eyes. But it did not take hold. Because the scene before them did not match the stories they had feared. There was no fire, no roar, no threat. Only a child sitting calmly, one hand resting on the head of a creature that should not exist. The elder stepped forward, his face pale, his gaze fixed. This, he began, his voice unsteady, this cannot be. Alin looked up, smiled. I told you, the child said. The words were simple, but they carried something undeniable. The elder had said that life could not come from stone. That time would not change what something was. That belief did not alter reality. And yet, here it was. Not because of force, not because of power, but because a human child had refused to stop believing, had cared without proof, had given without expectation. The dragon shifted, lifting its head. For a moment, the crowd tensed. But instead of fire, instead of fury, the creature simply looked at them. Curious. And then slowly it spread its wings. They were small, fragile, but unmistakable. The light caught them as they moved, and for a brief, breathtaking moment, the valley remembered something it had long forgotten. The sky. Alin's hand rested gently against the dragon's neck. It's all right, the child whispered. We'll teach you. Above them, the sky stretched wide and endless. Waiting, and for the first time in centuries, it would soon remember what it meant to burn.